little bit like cruel and unusual punishment for the minister and everyone else in this chamber to continue this session after the last 3 hours of heat. But that's going to happen, I guess. So we're here till 4 for better or for worse. So I guess I say that, Mr. Chair, in case anyone feels like they want to take a short break before we begin the questions.
I give them 2 breaks.
Well, I'm just, if everyone's okay, that's good. I'm willing to cut off 5 minutes or something from my time if people need a break. Okay, you're tough as nails. That's good. I wanted to start with some questions around the equalization payments, which form such a significant part of our revenue. Now, over the last 3 years, we've increased our equalization revenue by $450 million, about a 25.6% increase over 3 years. So what I'm wondering is whether or not finance has done any modeling to look at what impact there might be, if any, on equalization next year. I see an interview with the economist from the University of Calgary there, Professor Trevor Tome, who was saying that since it's based on a 3-year rolling average, the change in the overall Canadian GDP may not actually affect equalization payments next year. Today, the IMF World Economic Outlook came out again for June and is projecting an 8.4% reduction in Canada's GDP. And of course, the size of the overall pie for equalization, which is $20.6 billion now, is based on what our GDP nationally is doing. So I'm asking if there's been any modeling done by finance on different scenarios.
To the member opposite, through the chair, they have done actually some a look ahead at 2021, 2022, but we're only into the third month of 2020, 2021, so it's awful hard. I mean, as the member said, there are all sorts of factors. Are non-recipient provinces going to become recipients in the future? Is equalization going to be split up that much more? Slow down the economy could restrict the level of health transfers. Any number of factors. I mean, you know what, they're saying they could take a $100 million hit to equalization. It could be a lot more than that, but it's a long ways out still to try and predict accurately.
And thank you, through you to Mr. Chair. And that is one of the challenges, of course, with projections in the current climate of COVID. So I'm wondering whether or not it's possible for finance to provide, when they're providing updates like the one we got in May, which was really based on 1 month, to include margins of error in the projections, or levels of confidence in the projections. So, you know, when you look at the revenue outlook and you say, well, with respect to revenue from gambling in all its forms, you know, our margin of error for the projection out to the end of the fiscal year is thus, or our level of confidence is so much percent, versus, say, our level of confidence around corporate income tax revenue or something. Anyways, you know what I mean? The level of confidence or the margin of error in each of those calculations is going to vary depending on what exactly it is you're looking at and what you're able to know at this point about those things. So that would be quite helpful I think, for everyone in getting a better sense of how we're doing in this fiscal year with regards to the budget and where we're going to end up. So is that a possibility for finance to develop when they're reporting out on the fiscal and economic updates, margins of error around revenues and expenses to give us and the public some sense of how solid or how weak are some of the projections?
Through the chair to the member opposite, I think it's a good suggestion. Certainly, see the level of confidence. So I guess we'll take it under advisement and we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Through the chair to the minister, thank you very much. I think that that would help at least to illuminate it a little better in terms of with the considerable uncertainty that is having to be addressed here, to give us a sense of the scope of that uncertainty on the different pieces of the economic outlook, revenue and expenses. So we know equalization isn't designed to deal with a particular year where we see a significant loss of revenue. That's what the fiscal stabilization program is for. So I'm wondering whether the finance intends to apply to that program, and if so, how much revenue they would expect if they were successful from the fiscal stabilization program.
To the member opposite, through the chair, yes, I'm familiar with the Fiscal Stabilization Fund, and I believe that in one of the phone calls that I was on with the finance ministers from across the country, that Newfoundland, Alberta are both trying to apply for that. It's a little early for us to think about applying because you have to apply for the year after you got your year in, so we wouldn't be applying until after the fiscal is done of March, or of year 2020, 2021. How much revenue would we expect? That's impossible to predict at this time, how much money we would get out of it. But we would be applying. If we're at all eligible, we'll certainly apply for it, yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's currently capped at $60 a person. If we got the max, I guess that would be somewhere upwards of $45 million. I mentioned Trevor Toome earlier from the University of Calgary, an economist there, who looked at New Brunswick and said, you know, if the overall GDP in Canada dropped by 10%, that might lead to a reduction in our equalization of around 1.7% or $37.6 million. So this would nicely offset it if we got the max. But I guess I know that the Council of the Federation has made a proposal which would remove that cap on the fiscal stabilization program. Is that a position that, as Minister of Finance, Mr. Chair, I'm asking the Minister that he's pursuing, to have the cap lifted on fiscal stabilization?
I to remember all this stuff. Through the chair, to the member opposite, yes. Sorry, I'm trying to remember whenabouts I signed the letter, but yes, I did send a letter asking for removal of the cap. I believe all the provinces did, I believe.
Mr. Chair, that's excellent to hear on that, because it would make a difference, I think, for us. I guess I'm speaking of caps. Also, recently there was a cap put on the equalization payments in general, and I'm wondering whether there is a push to have that. I know there's a push, but whether the minister has been advocating that cap be removed, because according to some economists anyways, that would benefit us in our maritime Atlantic Canadian sister provinces.
Through the chair, to the member opposite, I have not asked for that. I didn't know that was being considered, I guess, the equalization cap being removed, but we'll explore the possibilities, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. So, through Mr. Chair, just moving off of equalization on to the fiscal and economic updates. That was based on actuals in April. We've been through May now. Did May look, I guess there's a two-part question. Did May look more or less what you were projecting, like what you were projecting here in the update? And how does June look so far based on what you know? I know we're not out of it yet, but I know you know something.
Through the chair, to the member opposite. It may look like what we thought it would. May was a little bit better than we thought it was going to. We had a little bit more revenue than we thought we were going to get, and I'd say June, as we open up more of the businesses, is looking a little bit better again. As of Friday, June 26th, they'll be allowed to open up, whether or not they're able to get everything in together in time. But I mean, the casinos and water parks and all the rest of that are allowed to be opened up, and some of the larger entertainment venues are allowed to be opened up. But as we have a little bit extra revenue, we also have the expenses that COVID is costing us, and that is, you know, in health, the PPE, public safety at the borders, and the like. So there are sort of added expenses that that go with this. So I would say that if you can say it looks better than we thought it would, marginally, I guess.
Thank you. So I'm assuming we're going to see the regular quarterly fiscal economic update when that's prepared. Yeah. Mr. Chair, he said yes. I didn't sit down, so he was nodding. The minister was, for anyone who's listening or watching. So, okay, well, that's good. You mentioned things opening up. There are a few. There's one sector in particular that because of COVID is not really going to be able to open up in the foreseeable future, and those are venues for artists where physical distancing is impossible. So clubs that run off of live music, for example, and so they're venues for musicians. I know here. I mean, I know they're all trying to figure out ways to survive, and they're taking advantage of what they can in terms of the federal programs and so on and so forth. Even the Capitol Complex in Fredericton here has opened up a vinyl record store within the club 7 days a week, so you can go buy vinyl records. So they're trying to be creative, but I'm wondering whether the minister would consider refunding or forgiving property taxes for those venues. There wouldn't be that many and it wouldn't be that much money when you look at it across the province. The nonprofit ones are already exempt anyway. So it's a question of, I guess, looking at how much money. I know the revenue is a big issue, and you don't want to lose any revenue. You don't have to. But if it proves to be small enough to be acceptable, I think it could be the difference between some of those venues going bankrupt or not. So I'm just wondering, through you, Mr. Chair, to the minister, whether that's a possibility.
Through the chair to the member opposite, yes, on every property tax case we do look at, it is on a case-by-case basis, but absolutely we will we'll look at what we can do. If we can defer, if we can do more than defer, then we certainly will look at that, but it is on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you for that response. So you may be getting some requests with the subtitle David Kuhn sent me, and hopefully you'll look on them positively. I was just looking for a little update on a commitment that has been made a number of times, and I think we talked about it last year in estimates, and that is the status of the effort to ensure beneficial ownership is provided for. That transparency is enabled. I know the department was moving forward on it a year ago. Just wondering how far we are away from seeing those changes made. I know it's happening nationally as well, so we're part of that, I guess.
To the member opposite, through the chair, in terms of beneficial ownership, this is from the staff here. Transparency of ownership of corporations and other entities such as trusts is important in efforts to prevent tax evasion and other illegal activities. There is a federal, provincial, and territorial working group that's exploring options to strengthen the transparency and collection of beneficial ownership information for privately held corporations in Canada. Apparently, the federal government is seeking to improve beneficial ownership transparency by initiating public consultations on a publicly accessible pan-Canadian beneficial ownership registry. Service New Brunswick is responsible for the corporate registry here in the province and is considering beneficial ownership amendments within the context of the potential modernization of the Business Corporations Act. So they are looking at it within that context. Member.
For that response, and Mr. Chair, those are my questions. I want to thank the Minister and his staff for their helpful responses to my questions, and to the Minister for his undertakings today, and hope that he enjoys a cool one after this. Water, of course.
Thank you, Member. Recognize the